We're continuing our series entitled Jesus Is, out of the Gospel of John. I feel today like I lived this. It's been a very challenging 2 weeks. And there's an interesting thing. Sometimes I feel almost, selfish, because I am sitting here going, this passage has ministered to me and helped me. And I hope that today it will do the same for you. We're just trying to do a couple of things here today, which is we're going to read all of John chapter 13. And I want you to understand that I'm not going to be able to, and thank the Lord for that, dissect all of it verse by verse. But I feel like there's something God's trying to teach us today that I would like to share with you, and hopefully it will bless you as well. So the title of our sermon today is that Jesus is the example. And I'm just going to read the chapter now, and we'll walk back through it as we go. Now before the feast of the Passover, Jesus, knowing that his hour had come, that he would depart from this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. And during supper, the devil, having already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had handed all things over to him, and that he had come forth from God and was going back to God, got up from supper and laid his outer garment aside, and he took a towel and tied it around himself. Then he poured water into the basin and began washing the disciples' feet and wiping them with the towel which he had tied around himself. So he came to Simon Peter. He said to him, "Lord, you are washing my feet?" Jesus answered and said to him, "What I am doing you do not realize right now, but you will understand later." Peter said to him, "Never shall you wash my feet." And Jesus answered him, if I do not wash you, you have no place with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, then wash not only my feet, but also my hands and my head." And Jesus said to him, "Stop being so extra, Peter." I don't know, it just felt like that when you read it. It's like, he who has bathed needs only to wash his feet, otherwise he is completely clean, and you are clean, but not all of you. For he knew the one who was betraying him. It was for this reason that he said, "Not all of you are clean." Then when he had washed their feet and taken his garments and reclined at the table again, he said to them, "Do you know what I have done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are correct, for so I am. So if I, the Lord and the teacher, washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I gave you an example so that you also would do just as I did for you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a slave is not greater than his master, nor is the one who sent greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. I am not speaking about all of you. I know the ones whom I have chosen, but this is happening so that the scripture may be fulfilled. He who eats my bread has lifted up his heel against me. From now on I am telling you before it happens, so that when it does happen, you may believe that I am he. Truly, truly, I say to you, the one who receives anyone I send receives me, and the one who receives me receives him who sent me." When Jesus had said these things, he became troubled in his spirit and testified and said, "Truly, truly, I say to you, that one of you will betray me." The disciples began looking at one another at a loss of knowing of which one he was speaking. Lying back on Jesus' chest was the one of his disciples whom Jesus loved. So Simon Peter nodded to this disciple and said to him, "Tell us who it is of whom he is speaking." He then simply leaned back on Jesus' chest and said to him, "Lord, who is it?" Jesus then answered, "That man is the one for whom I shall dip the piece of bread and give it to him." So when he had dipped the piece of bread, he took and gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. After this, Satan then entered him. Therefore Jesus said to him, "What you are doing, do it quickly." Now none of those reclining at the table knew for what purpose he had said this to him. For some were assuming, since Judas kept the money box, that Jesus was saying to him, "Buy the things we need for the feast," or else that he was to give something to the poor. So after receiving the piece of bread, he left immediately, and it was night. Therefore when he had left, Jesus said, "Now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and will glorify him immediately. Little children, I am still with you a little longer. You will look for me, and just as I said to the Jews, now also I say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. I am giving you a new commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, where are you going?" Jesus answered, "Where I am going, you cannot follow me now, but you will follow later." Peter said to him, "Lord, why can I not follow you right now? I will lay down my life for you." And Jesus replied, "Will you lay down your life for me? Truly, truly, I say to you, a rooster will not crow until you deny me 3 times. Amen. That's a lot. I get it. But for those of us who have been around for a minute, seeing as there's multiple accounts of this in different Gospels, we're somewhat familiar with this episode. Yes, the washing of the feet, Judas betraying Jesus, Peter being told he's going to deny Jesus. These are all kind of part of our space. But today I felt like we needed to see it as a whole, as that's what God was showing me. Because he was showing me that this whole episode kind of encapsulates what Jesus is calling us to. And so let's just talk about the example. In verses 12 through 17, it says, "Then when he had washed their feet and taken his garments and reclined at the table, he said to them, 'Do you know what I have done for you?'" And so he's telling them, hey, guys, this is something, remember, he knows that his time is coming. So this is like his final instruction for them. Although he's going to say a lot more in the gospel, this is a time when he has them all together without other people there. And he's speaking to those who has been gathered with him closely. And he says, "You call me teacher and Lord, and you are correct. So you both see me as teacher and as Lord." Okay, because at first it was just teacher, but now they understand that he's Lord. "And you're correct, for so I am. So if I, Lord and teacher," so if I'm God, right, like if I am Lord, and I am teacher, and I know everything, and I can tell you everything, "wash your feet," you also ought to wash one another's feet. So he's saying, I stand at a greater space than you, yes? And if I am willing to do this, you also need to be willing to do this, all right? And I know we all know this, but just understand. He's saying this clearly because we're going to unpack the feet washing and all that a little bit. But it says, "For I gave you an example so that you would do just as I did for you." Now, don't forget that phrase, just as I did for you, because in the kind of Christian circles, I think maybe we've taken this far too literally. Not maybe, we have taken this far too literally. Even done it myself, where we feet wash people because Jesus said, "Do as I do," right? That's kind of, anyways. "Truly, truly, I say to you, a slave is not greater than his master, nor is one who is sent greater than one who sent him." And Jesus is saying, so don't look and see yourself as something more. He says, if you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. And what Jesus is talking about, because he'll say it later, is he's saying that what he is doing right now is he is showing them. He is exemplifying love. And he's saying, do as I do as I say. As Paul would say later, because we're supposed to be disciples who make disciples, follow me as I follow Christ. And this is what I think we have to understand. Jesus is discipling right now. And so the example that Jesus is giving them, and the example he's giving with his life, I'll just be really honest with you, is how you truly love people. What he's showing them in this meal is how you truly love people. Just being there with them in this time, gathering around a table, giving them his time when there's so much other stuff he could be doing, right? Filling out his bucket list, whatever. He's choosing this space with them. And as we unpack this, I think you're going to see the great extent of his love. But what we also need to understand is that discipleship is not just a task. To truly disciple people, we have to love them. We have to love them. That's the example Jesus is giving. And so let me unpack the different ways that Jesus shows us what love is all about in community and in discipleship. And the first is that love requires humility. In verse 4 it says, he got up from supper and laid his outer garments aside. He took a towel and tied it around himself. I'm going to stop right there. Okay? This is the Passover meal. They've undoubtedly put on the best that they have, right? To go and gather together and have this meal. And Jesus gets up and literally strips down, all right? And I know we think that feels weird. Right? But it wasn't, listen, he wasn't doing something that he couldn't, first of all. And we're going to talk about that in a second. But he literally stripped all of his clothes off as a servant would. Literally bared everything, putting aside all of status, all of his clothes that might have been good clothes, all of that stuff. You understand what I'm saying? He did all of that so that he could show them what love was. It required him to put aside all of his self-consciousness. I mean, how many times have you not gone someplace because you didn't like the clothes that you had or the way that your hair looked? Or that you were, okay, how about this? That you were at least late to it. And Jesus basically says, "You warts and all, if that's what you got to see, I will do whatever it takes in order for you to understand what love is." He lays down all of his pride. And we know this throughout the gospel, right? We know this from the sense when Paul talks about he emptied himself and became like us. This is Jesus in just stripping down, showing in flesh what he did in incarnation. Stripping off all that he was and humiliating himself to become like us. And he's doing this in real time in front of his disciples so that they understand that love also requires sacrifice and service. So in John 13:5, after he's stripped that off and humiliated himself, essentially, then he began to pour water into the basin and began washing the disciples' feet and wiping them with the towel which he had tied around himself. Now, this is something we have to understand because sometimes I think we miss it. And I know we understand it, but we miss it. Because, listen, feet washing, especially now, is super gross. Because we all put socks on and we put on shoes and all our bacteria get to live together in our socks and our shoes, and our feet really stink because of that. And then we do this really wise thing where we all stick our feet in the same bucket. This is not the same environment. It's different. They're wearing sandals, all right? And they're walking on dirt roads, and so their feet get very dirty. And so let me explain it to you this way. In order for you to just sit down and not make the house filthy and move around, in order for you to sit down and just be comfortable, like this is kind of a necessity once you've been walking around. And they've probably cleaned up, not probably, it's Passover meal, so they've cleansed and washed and bathed, right? And they're all clean and ready to go except for their feet. And undoubtedly, if we look at this scenario, they're all sitting there looking at each other, knowing that somebody needs, that their feet need to be washed, and nobody's doing it. Okay, this is not something that was forbidden. Like we can talk about the fact that in the Jewish culture, right, it wasn't even fit for a Jewish woman to wash someone's feet. That was kept for the slaves, for the servants to do. And Jesus literally put on the outfit of a servant and sacrificed his pride, sacrificed his standing, sacrificed his privilege, sacrificed his comfortability to serve them. See, it wasn't forbidden for him to do it, but it was below him. It was beneath his standing. But we've got everyone in this room looking at each other going, well, I'm not doing it. And they're not saying it out loud, but they're saying it because nobody's doing it. Nope. Hopefully they got some servant or something coming to this upper room at some point because I ain't doing it. So we see in verses 6 through 10, Jesus said, so he came to Simon Peter and he said to him, and Peter said to him, Lord, you're washing my feet? And this is very interesting. Jesus answered and said to him, what I am doing, you do not realize right now, but you will understand later. Now, this we need to hold on to, because this is where we miss the point of what Jesus is doing. We want to make this point about the feet washing. Jesus is not making his point with the feet washing. He's using the feet washing so that later, when they look back on what he has done, they understand that the feet washing was a foreshadowing of his sacrifice on the cross. And this is very important because when he says, do as I say, do as I do, he's not telling them, go wash people's feet. He's telling them, lay down your life for the sake of others. And they wouldn't understand that in that moment, but they're going to understand that later once he has died on the cross for them. And Peter said to him, never shall you wash my feet. And Jesus answered, if I do not wash you, you have no place with me. So then Peter's like, total of 180, never mind, God. Like, how do I get in the bucket? Right? Then wash not only my feet, but also my hands and my head. And Jesus said to him, and this is where you need to understand, this is why Jesus is foreshadowing something, because without the cross, this doesn't make a lot of sense. Jesus said to him, he who has bathed needs only to wash his feet. Otherwise, he is completely clean, and you are clean, but not all of you. See, this is not about feet washing. This is about Jesus' impending death, right? He's showing them, like, what's going to happen, and he's showing them what he expects from them once it does, that they will continue this service and this sacrifice to others. Now, what does it mean? What does it mean when he says, like, you know, you only need to have your feet washed, right? Well, let's think about it. Later in John chapter 15, Jesus is going to say that his word makes them clean, right? And so they've been living with Jesus. They know all of this stuff. And what they need to do at this moment, and this is the key, having heard everything that Jesus has said, they need to accept his sacrifice. The only thing left, having heard and been with him, is this: will you accept? And this is why it's so important for us to see that this is not about feet washing. Peter, if you will not accept my sacrifice, you cannot be with me. Do you see it? And yes, quite frankly, it probably has a little bit more to do with it than just that. Jesus may be showing them, and this is something you got to do daily. Your feet going to get dirty. Come to me. And so we have to remember, Jesus is telling, hey, remember the example. It's not about washing feet. It's about laying down your crown, laying down your pride, and doing what is needed in your community. Do you hear that? I know there are so many things that are beneath you. So many things that you think someone else should do. And so we will literally sit there and have the church or our community or our KLC or whatever lack the very thing we could provide because it's not in my contract. It's not in my purview. It's not something I signed up for. It's not about that. Do you understand? Because I have no doubt. Listen, Peter would have washed Jesus' feet in an instant. Hear what I'm saying? In an instant. If Jesus said to Peter, Peter, please wash my feet, Peter would have done what he did before, stripped all the way down and got down there and washed Jesus' feet in an instant. But just like every other disciple, he sat there silently doing nothing when it would have been something to give to his community. Waiting for someone else to wash his feet. And that is not the way God has called us into community. He has called us into community not just to observe the needs we need met, but to meet the needs that our community has. That's love. Not because we have to, not because it's our role, but because we can. And because it's demanded of us. Also, Jesus shows us in this passage that love requires honesty. Something very hard for us to do sometimes in community. And I forgot to make that part of this whole thing. This is love in the context of community. What does this look like? So in verse 11 it says, "For he knew the one who was betraying him, and it was for this reason that he said, 'Not all of you are clean.'" Now, do you know how offensive that is? And I want you to understand, you're going to see it further in a little while, but that's not because Jesus is being petty or trying to throw a grenade at Judas. It's because Jesus is still hopeful, even in this moment. Like, he knows everything. We'll talk about it in a second, but at the same time, he's trying to expose and give people the opportunity to change. Even in this moment. So if you say, you could look back at it now, you can't look back on it and say that Judas didn't know better. He didn't know that this was leading to something. Jesus told him, this is going to go poorly for you unless you turn. In verse 33, right, he says, "Little children, I am still with you a little longer. You will look for me, and just as I said to the Jews, now I also say to you, where I'm going, you cannot come." That's hard to hear. But you know how often we fail to prepare those in our community for what life is like without us? How often we avoid the tough conversations about what might be going on in our life because we think we're protecting someone? But Jesus is saying, no, you guys need to understand what's going and where we're going and what's happening. I want you to be able to stand firm. I don't want your faith to be shaken to the ground. I want you to know that this is not an accident. I want you to know what's happening. I want you to see it. I have conversations with my kids all the time. I'm like, I know you think that I'm pretty cool and all that other stuff right now, but I make a lot of mistakes, and I want you to know that I make a lot of mistakes, and you're going to hear some things, and I don't want that to shake your faith in God because I haven't been a great example of Him. There's no need to pretend in community, not Christian community anyways. No platitudes, no Christianese. It's time to be honest. Hey, part of the reason I can't serve you right now, my spirit is crushed. Instead of pretending like we're going to do it and then we don't do it because we don't even have the capacity for it. Then in verse 36 through 38, it says, Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, where are you going?" Jesus answered, "Where I'm going, you cannot follow. You'll follow later." So he tells him, "Listen, Peter, you can't come with me. I'm just being honest with you. But you're going to come." And then he says this. Peter says, "Lord, why can I not follow you right now? I will lay down my life for you." And Jesus said, "Will you lay down your life for me? Truly, truly, I say to you, a rooster will not crow until you deny me 3 times." This is honesty. But in this honesty, Jesus actually gives Peter hope. Because when Peter does walk this out the way that Jesus said he is going to, he also has to have in the back of his head this thing where Jesus said, "But you're going to follow me." He's preparing Peter, even now, for the rejection. This is unbelievable. Jesus is ministering to the person who is going to reject him so that the person who rejects him will still be able to come back to him. Talk about love. And that's the other thing. Love requires unrelenting choice. In verse 1 and 2, it says, "Now before the feast of the Passover, Jesus, knowing that his hour had come, that he would depart from this world to the Father." So understand the context. He's getting ready and knowing he's going to die. This is what he says. "Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end." Who has the NIV open right now? Pastor Carol doesn't have it open because she doesn't think it's important to have the Bible open while I preach. The NIV says what? What does NIV say at the end of verse 1? He loved them. Not to the end. It says something else. It says to the full extent or something like that. To the full extent of his love. It's important because in verse 2 it says, the devil having already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot. So Jesus is at a meal, listen to me very carefully, at a meal with the disciples whom by God were chosen. And in that space is one who is going to reject him and one who is going to betray him. And despite the fact that both of those people, along with others who are going to scatter, are there, it says that even in that moment, it's so important, words are important, he loved them. All of them in that room, he loved to the full extent of his love until the very end of his life, not because they had shown themselves worthy of his love, but because he had determined to love them in an unrelenting way. Despite what they would do to him, he would love them to the end. In John 13, 26 through 28, it says, and it talks about this moment with the bread, and I think it's important for us to see at least one possibility that be happening right now. Because we hear that John, I know it says the disciple Jesus loved. I'll just say, I think it's John. That doesn't. And he's leaning back, and Peter says to him, bro, ask him who he's talking about when Jesus says someone will betray you. And Jesus says this, that man is the one for whom I shall dip the piece of bread and give it to him. Now, there's a very strong reality here that could be at play. If you understand the Passover meal or even a Jewish meal in general, it would seem and appear that kind of if you reconstruct the whole scene, that Judas has to be quite close to Jesus, yes, in order for Jesus to give him the piece of bread. And if you understand how things work right and left, it's most likely that John is on the right, leaning against Jesus, and that, in fact, Judas then would be on his left, which in Jewish culture meant he was given the seat of honor. And if that's the case, and even if it isn't, this still holds true, but you have to understand that in this moment, Jesus has given Judas every opportunity to the very end to not be able to say that Jesus somehow rejected him, pushed him out, denied him. Jesus, even to the end, is giving Judas an opportunity to not do what the enemy is promoting in his life. And so Jesus says, I will tip the piece of bread, and gave it to him. So even in that moment, Judas now knows. Jesus knows what's happening. He's calling me honestly to account. He has put me in the seat of honor, and I have the opportunity right now to repent. That's how much Jesus' love is shown in this moment. His unrelenting choice for Judas is that, love believes all things, even to the end. He took and gave it to Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, and he doesn't reject it. He takes it. And you got to understand that if he took it, he ate it. He essentially at that moment said, I am that man. And it says, after this, not until then, you got to see it. After this, Satan then entered him. And then Jesus said, okay, it's done. What you are doing, do it quickly. That therefore, what's it therefore is important. The after is important. Until the very last moment, Jesus was giving Judas every opportunity to choose, listen, to receive his sacrifice. To receive him for who he was and not who Judas wanted him to be. But when Judas said, no, I take that cup. I take that bread. I receive that as my own. He gave himself away to something else. And that is why Jesus said, finally, what you are doing, do it quickly. And that's also why, brothers and sisters, if you think about it that way, none of those reclining at the table knew for what purpose he had said this to them. They couldn't understand it. But Judas was being loved by Jesus to the end, even put in the seat of honor, and now he's been told to go out and do something. It doesn't make any sense. Maybe if he's already kind of been put on the outskirts and everybody knows that these things are happening. But that's not what's going on. We also see in verse 36, right? I know we've talked about this a little bit, but it says, Simon Peter, he said to him, Lord, where are you going? And Jesus answered, where I'm going, you cannot come. But you will follow me later. Even in this moment, knowing that Peter is going to deny him, he's saying, but I've chosen to love you, Peter, despite what you're going to do. And I will love you until the very end. Now, these are hard things to do. And if I were just say to you, hey, love requires you to just humiliate, and essentially humiliate yourself sometimes, right? Let go of your pride. Love requires service and sacrifice. Love requires this unrelenting choice. It'd be like, man, that sounds really hard, and it is. If we just go out and try to have that kind of love for one another, it's not going to work. We're actually going to become very resentful very quickly. Because people just are like Judas and Peter, to be frank. And so the only way we can get through this is if we understand that love requires obedience. And that obedience starts with what Jesus tells us throughout the gospel. We can't remove it from that, which is what? To love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor in place of yourself. If we don't first obey the first part of that, the rest of it doesn't work. You have to understand that. So in verse 34 and 35, when Jesus says, I am giving a new commandment that you love one another, just as I have loved you, let's not forget how Jesus has loved them. He has loved them through the lens of loving relationship with the Father. He has loved them in a sacrificial way, yes, in a way that has shown humility, yes, with unrelenting choice, but that has been undergirded. It has been supported by his relationship with the Father. He says, just as I have loved you, that you also love one another. And it's by this that people will know you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. So he even indicates that right there. You're my disciple. Our relationship, and out of our relationship flows this ability to love others sacrificially, to love others with humility, to love others, right, brothers and sisters, in this unrelenting choice, even when it feels like there is no hope for that person or for this thing. But if God has called them into your life and told you you're to love them, you still got to do it. And that's what Jesus exemplifies in this moment. And brothers and sisters, the only way that works, the only way we can be obedient is if we love God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength. Because then we know He's got me, even if people don't. And that's where we have to understand that love requires faith. In order for us to pour our lives out in community, we must have faith. In verse 3, this is what it says, Jesus, knowing. There is a certainty. Knowing that the Father had handed all things over to him. Now, understand that the only way that happens is if Jesus is raised from the dead and exalted. So now facing all of these tough things, Jesus knows. And that he had come forth from God and was going back to God. I promise you, without that faith, there is no way Jesus loves them to the full extent of his love. Without knowing without knowing that this sacrifice is being called for by his Father who will not leave him nor forsake him, without knowing this, it would be impossible for him to let go of all of his status and position. It would be impossible for him to stop fighting for everything he needs if he didn't truly believe that his Father got him. I can't give myself away to this community if I believe that I have to preserve my family and my finance and my home. Do you understand? I can't. I can't give myself away because I don't actually believe that God will take care of me, that God will take care of my family. I have to believe that God is who he says he is, that God is my provider, that God does care for me, that when Jesus says where he's going, I will go also, then I don't have to fight for the peanuts on the floor of this life. If you know what I'm talking about, go to a restaurant sometime, they got the peanuts in the bucket, and then you got somebody, you're scrapping for it on the floor. That's what this life is. You know when that woman says, hey, even the dogs get the crumbs off the table? Brothers and sisters, we're living under the table. Because we're going to have a feast sitting with Jesus. Do you understand what I'm saying? That's why we can't love each other the way we're supposed to unless we have faith. John 13:18, I am not speaking about all of you. I know the ones whom I've chosen, but this is happening. Hey, listen, he's saying this stuff is happening. I have faith. I have faith because I've read the word. It says that happened, the scripture may be fulfilled. He who eats my bread is lifted up his heel against me. Listen, I know this is hard. This is ugly. But I know that God has a plan and a purpose. I have faith that what he said he was going to do, he is going to do. And it is written in his word that this has to happen for him, his stuff to be fulfilled. And I am okay because I know that God is not a man that he should lie, nor a man that he should change his mind. So I can love you even when you don't love me. I can give to you even when you don't give back to me. John 13:31-32. Therefore, then, when he had left, Jesus said, now, and this is important, he's saying Judas left to betray him. And he says, fine, the next act has begun. And it's all one for Jesus. The moment that shoe drops, so to speak, the moment Judas leaves that room, Jesus says, now it's done. Now the Son of Man is glorified. What are you talking about? You're about to get whipped and beaten and humiliated. Yeah. Because that puts me on the way to glory. And God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself and will glorify him immediately. The faith is that when I walk through this, God will take care of me. And then in verse 36, we don't have to read the whole thing again, but there is these statements in here that are so bold. Where I am going. He knows where he's going. He's not talking about the cross. I know sometimes we want to think that. He's talking about glory. That's where I'm going. And he speaks to someone who betrays him, denies him. And he says, I'm going to prepare a place for you too. That's love. But we can't love each other if we don't believe God is who he says he is. We can't love each other the way we're supposed to if we don't have a relationship that is first oriented in God being everything we need. Because if we need to, in order for us to walk through this life, we need people to build us up, to give us accolades. If we need people to love us, we're going to be miserable. Because, brothers and sisters, what this story also tells us, and I want you to hear it today, because I know there's some of us in this room, including myself. See, if you love people the way God has called you to, love will also always result in suffering. In suffering. In John 13:11 it says, he knew the one who was betraying him. That's suffering. He spent all of these years pouring into these people. And what he was going to return from them was death. That's suffering. I can't imagine. That's day in and day out for nearly 3 years that he has poured his life and his love and his sacrifice and his humility, unrelentingly choosing these men and women. And they are going to abandon him. They're going to abandon him, misunderstand him, misrepresent him, tell other things to other people that aren't true, make up their own narratives to justify their choices. And all the while, Jesus has done nothing but love them. In verse 21 it says, he said all this stuff. He told them about the examples. He gave them all the honesty and all the love and all the stuff he needed to. And when Jesus had said these things, he became troubled in spirit. The only other time in the gospel talks about this is when he's at Lazarus' grave. And it's like this deep guttural pain. And if you know, you know. It's like sickening. This feeling, it's excruciating that Jesus is feeling in this moment because he has loved those that God has called him to love. Brothers and sisters, here today, understand that feeling. Jesus understands it. And it is part of being the person that God calls us to be. To suffer in the midst of this. It's why the faith and the relationship with God first is so important. See, it's not because we're somehow unique or because God hates us that we suffer when we love others the way God calls us to. It's because we walk in the footsteps of our Master, our Lord, and our Savior, who tells us that we are not above him. And Jesus says, he became troubled in his spirit, and then he says, truly, truly, I say to you, that one of you will betray me. I don't see any anger. I see heartbreak. Sorrow, loss, for doing nothing but being obedient. And then in verse 38, Jesus looks at the guy who just told him, Jesus dumped the whole barrel on me. All I want is you. And Jesus says, will you lay down your life for me? Truly, truly, I say to you, a rooster will not crow until you deny me 3 times. Can you imagine the level of pain that you would be in And some of you have. You've experienced betrayal from people that you were called to love. And brothers and sisters, today, I want you to hear that Jesus understands. That he is there to comfort you in this time. But he is not there to excuse you from continuing to love sacrificially, with humility, with unrelenting choice. And today, he is calling you to remember that your first goal is not to love others, but to love him. To source your service and your humility in your faith that God is who he says he is, so that with hope you can endure the suffering that is your lot if you choose to be obedient.